What's up, squad? This is Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I had to hop on because I just saw um, basically the press conference between President Cyril Rhamaphosa of South Africa and President Donald Trump of the United States. And I'll admit, I didn't see everything. I saw enough that I just couldn't take anymore. So when I'm watching this, and this is my first time really seeing President Rhamaphosa of South Africa up close, I find it so disrespectful. So disrespectful how President Trump dealt with the South African situation. And and the reason why I found it disrespectful is because he didn't give a benefit of the doubt. And that's how you know if somebody respects you or not, right? The benefit of the doubt. If somebody don't respect you, they're looking for a reason to disrespect you. You know, it don't like there's a breeze that hit them in a hard way. They assume when you woke up, you flip your pillow, that pillow went into the atmosphere, that atmosphere flew dust into the air, and that's the breeze that hit you, and you blame that for it. You're just looking for a reason, no matter how illogical it is. Any excuse to attach you to something they don't like, they'll go for it. And I think that's exactly what happened with South Africa. I don't think President Trump, in fact, I know President Trump couldn't name 5 countries in Africa. I could be wrong, but I'm not. And that's saying a lot because South Africa is one of the most advanced and developed countries of Africa. I have a great affinity for South Africa. I have South African family, etc., etc., etc. So I watched it very close. I understand the history. I know South Africa from that regard. So I have a great respect for South Africa. So when I saw President Trump treat South Africa like he didn't know any better, like this was not one of the largest economy on the African continent. It is not the most westernized economy on the African continent. It is not one of the most developed economies on the African continent. I thought it was disrespectful for him to come in and talk to him as if they were just straight out the backwater. He pretty much talked to him as if they're from a country that had no understanding of the world, that they're just going around like they're headhunters or something like this, like some small island in the middle of the ocean that goes around hunting and eating people. That's how he treated South Africa. There was rumors of farmers being killed. Let's place this in context, right? South Africa is on the southern tip of the African continent. The reason why South Africa is so important is because when the Muslims monopolized trade between Europe and Asia through the Ottoman Empire, amongst other empires of the Islamic ilk, Europeans seeking to bypass this Muslim blockade sailed the oceans. And this started with the Portuguese, and then so on, so on, so on and so forth. And what the Europeans found out as they sent these ships, and this was all a part of this great age of discovery, age of exploration. This is what was the birth of a Christopher Columbus, except he went the wrong way, in theory. Vasco da Gama went east, while Columbus went west. And the Portuguese, not Vasco da Gama, but Bartholomew Diaz, I want to say, circumnavigated the African continent. Nevertheless, as the Portuguese circumnavigated the African continent, they found out that there was a southern tip of Africa. This climate was quite hospitable to Europeans because of its distance from the equator, unlike most of Africa, which was tropical. And eventually the Dutch overtook the Portuguese, and they actually set up a colony on South Africa in the southwest region of the country, which didn't exist back then, so southwest region of the continent, which would be known as pretty much Cape Town. And their first settlers, right, this was a way station because the true goal was to get to Asia, remember? It was Europeans trying to get to Asia for their spices and goods. This was a way station. And what the Dutch did was send down farmers because of the land was hospitable to agriculture, similar to the agriculture of Mediterranean temperate Europe. This is why farmers is pretty much synonymous with white in South Africa. They were called Boers, the Dutch reformer. Anyway, Europe continued to see migrations, whether they be French, whether they be German, and these amalgamated into what you would call Afrikaners, right? This is why many people say Afrikaans sound very similar to Dutch. This is distinct. This is distinct from a later wave of Europeans from the UK. These were British people, not necessarily Afrikaners. White South African and Afrikaner is not synonymous, right? Because they could come from a British background, which is antagonistic to the Afrikaners. I just want to lay that out there. So they try to group this all because this is America and you play the race war, the race game and everything like that. But there is a distinct history to South Africa. It is layers and multifaceted. Now, the problem with apartheid, South Africa evolved into the situation with apartheid, where the European descendants, whether that be more British than Afrikaner, but British and Afrikaner benefited because what they said was, look, we brought all this European technology and knowledge here. We built up a relatively Western style country, but you Africans are antagonistic to it. It's not similar to your way of life. You want a different way of life. And the word apartheid in itself means separateness. Now, I have a video. I have a whole documentary on South African history on my channel. Please check it out. I think it's a great work of art. The greatest documentary you'll find online about South Africa. And more very comprehensive of what actually went on. So nevertheless, apartheid, separateness. It was the Europeans trying to preserve their way of life while at the same time giving themselves preference in a country that is immensely rich in the mineral resources. So this is the whole situation. This is why South Africa is a very unique country within Africa. So President Rhamaphosa, obviously not liking the energy that President Trump was going there. He went there. And at first I was on board thinking, he's going to go there, be conciliatory. There's no reason to be antagonistic. America is a large economy. I don't necessarily see the geopolitical benefit between South African and American relationships. I see a much bigger complementary relationship between South Africa and Europe relationship than I do South Africa and American relationship. So I never really saw the value, but I'm thinking maybe President Rhamaphosa sees something I doesn't. And he goes there cap in hand, and in a respectful way, I'll put it that way. And he's very conciliatory. I'm liking because I like a humble leader, because you're not coming there on behalf of yourself. You're coming there on behalf of your people. But at the same time, you coming there on behalf of your people. There's a certain type of integrity and dignity that's required. I don't know why he went to America, but he decided it had to be done. And maybe he felt as though he can talk to President Trump like Saudis, the Middle Eastern countries did. But you got to understand, what did President Trump do? Right? A couple white people lost their lives, and he gives a refugee status. It's obvious that he has a preferential treatment. He didn't come to President Rhamaphosa and say, what's going on in South Africa? He was like, hey, you guys are crazy down there. You horrible people. Get my people out of there. Right? That's what he did. And that in itself shows you that there's going to be a high bar to cross to get his approval. And you have to assess, is the ROI worth it? Is the return on investment worth it? Trying to get President Trump approval if you're a South African leader. President Rhamaphosa, he assumed it was. He comes to America, and he was conciliatory. And I'm like, okay, I can dig this. You know, you represent your people. But then President Trump rolls down the screen. He started playing all types of ill-informed videos of minority parties talking reckless, which they do in South Africa. But minority parties talk reckless in America. There are various groups in America, because of freedom of speech, that say things that are heinous, despicable, but they have no real government pull. And to me, the fact that they did this, then without their due diligence, speaks to the disrespect, how little they respect the South Africa, what South Africa is doing. Their lack of knowledge, they didn't even investigate. They didn't even practice due diligence. They just played it. And then President Rhamaphosa sitting there trying to make excuses that he has, I want to say John Steinheiser. I don't know the name. This is the Department of Agriculture guy. That was ironically, he was a white guy, the head of the agriculture. He was the one to say, look, like the people you plan, these are people on the fringes. He's from the DA, right? The Democratic Alliance. He's like, this is why we partner with the ANC, because we don't want these psychos in power. And I think it was just unfortunate. It was unfortunate. I think President Trump gonna do what he wanna do. I remember Rhamaphosa was saying, I don't have a jet. Why you don't have a jet, Rhamaphosa? Why you don't have a jet? If you don't have a jet, don't talk about jets. Like, why would you bring that up in your conversation? With President Trump, he tried to sit there and offer him minerals, America's a big country. America's next to Canada, a bigger country. America got mineral deals up to yin yang, President Rhamaphosa, what I liked about him is he had the humility, right, to speak to an enemy, right? What I found unfortunate and what I didn't like is he came ill prepared. You come talk to the president of the United States of America, especially Donald Trump, who loves to talk down to people. You come there on an equal footing, or you don't need to come at all. There's nothing about the American economy that's going to make South Africa fall overnight. Maybe he thought he was getting a cheap win. And that's the thing with President Rhamaphosa. I'm starting to think this guy is a cheap win type of guy. I see what he did with the Congo. There was no reason for South African troops to be in the Congo. And then what happens? South African troops go into the Congo and they get in freaking their heads handed to them by a freaking veteran Rwandans. And now you come over here to America and you get called out on the world stage. I think South Africa, and this is what I'm saying, well, my affinity towards South Africa. I know South African history. South Africa is a phenomenal country. And the reason why South Africa is a phenomenal country is because it has something that I value very greatly. It has diversity. I think diversity made America great. I think diversity makes South Africa great. So I find it unfortunate when you have a South African leader comes to America as if they're a junior partner. And that's the one thing I would say about Europeans. And what I love about African histories, and I love how Africans try to keep their country together. The Europeans came in, they just cut swaths of land and called it a country. Where they're not nation states. These were empires built into countries with European definitions, right? These countries weren't necessarily built by consensus amongst African tribes. But since independence, Africa has fought to keep these countries together. Not only that, but Africans have helped other Africans keep these countries together. South Africa being a great example. And Mozambique, another great example. So many revolutionary fighters went to Mozambique to defend Mozambique in their colonial wars. And that's what I love about Africa is that they really came together to defend off outside forces. But there is the flaw, and it's the same flaw that I think many in my community in America have. It's like you can't scapegoat. And obviously what happened in a situation in South Africa, because it's already happening in Zimbabwe, is people try to scapegoat the Europeans without respecting the contribution. And it just is what it is. It's not an adoration, but it's a respect of the contribution that migrants make to the country. It is the reason why South Africa is one of the largest economies in Africa, despite being a mid-tier population, maybe about 50 million people, 55 million people in South Africa. It's outpacing countries like Egypt or Nigeria, which have 2, 3, 4 times its population. And it's because South Africa got speed course. Geopolitics is all about understanding how geography works, right? A lot of countries develop because they're adjacent to a spark, right? This is why Eurasia is so important. The population centers of the cradle of civilization within the Middle East and how that fluctuates. It's no coincidence one of the great ancient societies of Africa was ancient Egypt. The great civilization of Asia is Sumer, and the great civilization of Europe is Greece. And these nations are all relatively near each other. It's because iron sharpens iron. And what happened in South Africa, when them Europeans came to South Africa, yes, you had this African brotherhood there, but you had this European technological infusion into the country that gave it a fire that other countries in the region didn't necessarily have. And it's no harm in saying, thank you guys for bringing that here. You made us stronger. Now, how do we build on this as a people together, African and European, but all South African, to make this country go forward? Not scapegoat Europeans that say, why do you have so much and we have so little? The question is, show us how you got so much, and we show you how we can get more. It was just an unfortunate press conference. I was a little bit frustrated, if you can't tell. But it was interesting nonetheless. So I'd love to hear your thoughts if you saw it. Comment below. What do you think about the future relationship of South Africa and United States? Do you think it even is, it has any validity? Should there be a relationship? Or do you see other options? I know a lot of people are BRICS fans. I am not one of them people. But a lot of people are BRICS fans, and they say South Africa needs to, if you're not talking to Brazil, Russia, India, China, who are you talking to, South Africa? So I think South Africa value is, it is an African country that can be a bridge to Europe, vice versa, right? It has a Western culture that can bridge many of these places to Africa. Anglo-America, Glencore, these are phenomenal countries, companies, you know, and South Africa has a role. It's the financial center of sub-Saharan Africa. And, you know, I know that it has so much potential because of what I've learned about it. So it's just unfortunate. But I think South Africa does need a strong leadership. And that doesn't matter if South Africa doesn't believe that. So like I said, comment below if you have any insight on this. Like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, take care. Two up.